Here we go. Okay, Drew, hello and welcome to the show. Great to have you here today.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Amazing. Well, before we dive into our conversation today, I'd love to know what is one thing about your career journey that most people wouldn't expect?
Oh, what would something about my career journey that people wouldn't expect? I don't know how to say this other than there was no plan, rhyme, or reason. It was a lot of opportunity met luck, to get me to where I'm at right now.
Yeah, and honestly, something I learned the more and more I have conversations with founders and CEOs is like, the path isn't like it's not a linear journey. And so, sometimes you don't see it, but it's more like a zigzag and in ways that you don't even really know or understand when you're starting out. Um, it gets you to places that, before you wouldn't even dreamed of, or, so just to be here today and just to, look at the success that you've accomplished here. I mean, it's just really exciting, really inspiring.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So to kick off our conversation today, let's talk about the work you do now. So today at the DTI, you work with dual use startups, right? And if you could explain, like, what does dual use mean, and why is it important for startups to think about working, with both the government and private sectors?
Yeah. So dual use means just exactly what you just referenced. The idea is that there's a federal, in my case, I work with a lot of Department of Defense related things, but there's some type of federal use case, and then there's a commercial use case as well. The reason that this is important is, the reference I like to use is like if you have a Roomba in your household, you have a defense project. They came through what is called the Small Business Innovative Research SBIR, which provides non-dilutive capital to startups that answer this dual use case, like call for technology. They used 13 of those to develop their algorithms that ultimately became the Roomba that vacuums your house. It used to be used to sweep minefields, kind of on the battlefield. So it's important to have dual use one because it opens up a new market. The federal market is obviously massive, but secondly, it kind of buys down your tech risk as a founder. So if you're developing something for a commercial use case and the military could buy it, or the federal government can buy it, not only do you have the financial incentive of a new market, but you can actually use a lot of the R&D grants and things like that to start to develop that technology.
Mhm. Yeah, that's incredible. And so you're talking about ways that the government kind of supports the SBIR, R&D grants. These are ways that the government gets involved and really helps startups make that push to continue to innovate, continue to build, and grow, their products and their businesses. You know, are there any misconceptions that people, might have about working with the government at first? I mean, is there any challenges that you ever see or kind of help founders work through, or how does that work? Do people just know
Oh,
right away, like, yes, I'm going to work with the government?
no, very rarely have I met a founder, unless it's a pure defense tech play where they're like 100% going to work with the government. A lot of this work, SBIR as a funding vehicle has been around since 1982. To give you context, SBIR sits at the top of the federal government in terms of where the money sits. And I could go through federal contracting, but that's like a 17-hour episode, and I don't think anyone wants to listen to that. But it's paid off a tax. So any organization that does like over 100 million in research and development has to pay into this quote unquote tax. So at the federal level, it's $3.3 billion that startups can access. So very rarely do I ever have a founder who outright comes in and says, "Hey, I want to do, defense work or things like that." And then often a lot of the early work we were doing was walking around trying to meet with mostly gaming companies about, "Hey, have you ever considered working with the Department of Defense?" So if it's an inherently like space or, UAV or things like that, I think a lot of people are aware that the federal market exists and is a customer, but they're not aware of all of the vehicles that are available. And then working with the federal government does present its own unique challenges to overcome. It is the federal government, it is bureaucratic. Um, I would say that, I don't want to say it's easy. We try to make it as simple as possible to work with the federal government to access these resources and kind of develop your dual use case.
I see. I see. That's great. And, to lean a little more, well, I'd like to circle back to this later, but
Yeah.
definitely, I mean, that's a really incredible insight. And that's something I feel like a lot of people like probably don't have on their radar, probably don't have in mind already when they're starting out, in this space industry or even any kind of like deep tech, startup. like industry, right? So I love what you said there, and I'd love to circle back later. But right now, I'd love to now discuss, how your journey looks like breaking into the industry. It could probably seem very intimidating for someone really new to this kind of world of like space and defense tech to kind of make connections, to kind of get their foot in the door. So how did you get your first opportunity in this space, and how did you make your first move to really break into the industry?
Oh, that's a great question. So to give you some context, I commissioned in the Air Force at the time from the real USC, the University of South Carolina. Go Cock. Um, and doing that, I went on to be what's called a missileer. So I used to sit in a bunker ready to push the big red button. Your fun fact for the day, it's not a big red button. It's three switches and a key. But within that, did that, switch over to the acquisition side of the house. Ultimately, when I was in undergrad, I played rugby. I thought I was going to move to Australia. My degree was in sport management. I was going to do all of that. So I got, did an operational assignment doing missiles. Came over to the acquisition side of the house. Thought I was going to work on missile programs for the government and buy like the new missile and all that kind of fun stuff. Anyway, showed up here and they're like, "Hey, we don't have any missiles. You got to learn about space." Um,
Oh wow.
Started doing that. Got super lucky at the time. SMC, so Space and Missile Systems Center, it's now known as Space Systems Command, was going through a reorg. I got thrown on a very ragtag team. It was myself, Lieutenant Colonel Walter Rock McMillan, and then at the time, Lieutenant Shauna Chen. We were told, "Hey, go figure out innovation." 99% sure that that meant like, please don't break our expensive space programs because you guys have no idea what you're doing yet. Um, we looked at kind of what was happening in the marketplace. We looked at how small business innovative research was being tooled as an investment vehicle within the DAF, so the Department of the Air Force, and decided to say, hey, we think we can do that. We think we can do that better. So that ragtag team over the next 9 months pulled together what we called Air Force Space Pitch Day. Ended up being $47 million in same day contract, same day award, and same day payment of your first deliverable, literally with a credit card. And so if you've ever done anything with the federal government, that is almost unheard of. That was my first foray into like doing this stuff and working with defense tech companies. Like we literally walked Venice Beach in full like military uniform to meet with companies, which by the way is a terrible idea. Do not do that. You get way too much attention that you don't want. And so that was kind of the first foray. And then so that kind of, I guess, I don't want to say lit the fire, but that had me really looking at how can I work with founders better? How can I get more capability? Being a nuke guy, like you can go back. I'm on Vice News at some point. You can see the capsule and you see me down there. A lot of that equipment is old. It still works. It's great. It does the mission, but it's older. And so I was like, all right, how do I get new stuff, for lack of a better term, to my friends, kind of who are still in the fight or still doing the mission? And then what does that look like for space? Space is going to be $1 trillion plus economy by 2030. There's a great opportunity there to connect, both kind of on the financial side, but as well as like start to get some really exciting new stuff in there. That's really very like forward thinking. Stuff you get excited about as a kid when you're watching like movies and things like that. That was the stuff that I was getting to see and getting to work on. So from there, I just kind of kept chasing that, for lack of a better term. So went on to found like another organization called the SSC Front Door. Spent some time working directly in a startup as a defense ventures fellow. Spent some time doing venture capital CRADAs, so cooperative research and development agreements, helping them connect to the government. Did some enterprise talent stuff. Now on the civilian side, if you will, helping founders day in, day out kind of access all these resources that we helped build.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's incredible. And, just to go back a couple steps, I love the image. The picture you painted of like walking through Venice and when you're like starting to build out these events, starting to build out, these programs in the LA area. And I can totally see it. I mean, and that's incredible. Like you said, you found you were onto something, you decided to lean into it, and then, here you are today. I mean, like we met at the Deep Tech Week in El Segundo. So, it's just incredible to see like where you started and where everything has progressed to now. It's really exciting. And I love that you said like growing up, like the things you watched in movies are the things you get to
Yep.
work on today. And I think that's, that's really cool. It's like that sci-fi aspect, and you're
Yeah, 100%.
you're taking like dreams and you're actually building them into reality. So that's pretty incredible. That's amazing.
I
And
have gotten a few pitches for a lightsaber. I have not seen a working one yet, so if you have one, please let me know.
really? Oh my gosh, I
Yes.
love
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
That's incredible. Wait, that's actually really funny for space tech, defense
Oh,
tech. That's
100%. Yeah. Anything you've seen in
in
a
all
movie, I've
seriousness.
definitely seen a proposal of someone trying to build it.
Oh wow.
I've gotten X-Wings, I've gotten lightsabers, I've gotten jetpacks, all the above. I haven't seen one that's working yet,
Yeah.
but I've had some interesting pitch decks come across my desk.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Well, I can't wait to see it happen. I mean, the day that we see lightsabers, I mean, that'll just be a whole new
I'll be the
a whole
first in
new
line.
era.
So, exactly.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, wait, that's amazing. And so to go back to something you mentioned earlier, you had this career like before you broke into the space tech industry and the startup side and on the civilian side, as you said. And I so you worked closely with the Department of Defense, right? The DoD. And from a startup's perspective, like how does one even really begin to think about partnering with an organization like that? Is it as complicated as it sounds, or what is that like?
So anyone who I might get smacked for this, anyone who says it's easy is probably trying to sell you something or some consulting services. But we have made a very conscious effort to make it as simple as possible. There's a book out there called Hack Your Bureaucracy. I highly recommend people read that if they are thinking about working, one, in a large organization, or two, working with a large organization to understand all the processes and things like that. Ultimately, the Department of Defense has to be a good steward of taxpayer dollars. So that's why there's all these checks and balances that folks have to navigate through. Now, that being said, a lot of the efforts over, the last probably, oh man, starting to date myself, 5, 10 years, have really been how do we get the barriers to entry lowered so they're getting great tech into the hands of the end user or the warfighter. So with that, probably the easiest on-ramp is what's called Small Business Innovative Research, SBIR, or its sister program, STTR. STTR, if you're in the university system, if you're working in a lab, if you're looking at getting IP out or getting an IP in, that's a good opportunity for you to connect. And then on the SBIR side, if you're a small business or a startup, important to note that there is definitely a difference between a startup and a small business. But as the federal government looks at it, you're classified as an SBC, a small business contractor. Now, with that, remains probably the easiest or simplest on ramp. Like a phase one is $75,000. It's a 3 month period of performance, but it's a feasibility study. It's customer discovery, it's business development. It's go find whether or not this white paper you submitted to us that there's a customer for it. It remains, in my opinion, the only time that anyone will ever pay you to see if you can sell to them. So that is the easiest on ramp. And then same on an SBIR phase two, that is to deliver a prototype. Those are at like a $1.25 million award. So very, very quickly, you can go from, hey, does my idea or my widget that I've been working on have a federal use case to actually being paid to deliver that as a prototype.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's great. And it's really, I think, important for the listeners right now to hear about these different programs and what that means, right? Getting involved, like what does that process look like? And so thank you for really, expanding more on that and sharing the details of, okay, like this is what you can expect. This is, what the process is. So yeah, thank you. I think that's a breakdown. And honestly, I'm not sure many listeners knew about these programs before a conversation today. So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's 11 federal agencies that answer SBI or STTR. So if you're like, I don't want to listen to the space guy who's talking about space and defense and all this other stuff, there's other federal agencies that use these resources to onboard commercial tech. Department of Agriculture, Department of Transportation, the National Science Foundation, NASA, all of the above, all have their own SBIR and STTR programs,
Mhm.
kind of for this reason.
Yeah, that's great. And so, I mean, I think a lot of what founders and a lot of startup teams might honestly kind of look to first, just because it's so emphasizes like venture capital,
Yeah,
right? So like that side of things, like the private kind of route to funding, but it's really really important, I think, to know about also alternative options, just all the options, so that you have
yeah.
on the table before you. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, and what I would say is like the biggest thing with SBIR, STTR, working with the federal government in this round, it's non-dilutive capital. So what that means is we don't take equity. There's a little bit of a different, I guess, incentive for us. On the Department of Defense side, the Department of Defense invests in capability versus the company. So rewarding you to develop the technology, whereas a VC is picking you as kind of the horse in the race in terms of delivering that capability and being the company to provide it. So we do have incentives. So if you are raising venture capital, there's vehicles like the StratFi that have matching funds kind of on your VC raise. There's other incentives. We look for that commercialization. But ultimately, when you get an SBI or STTR, the federal government is not sitting on your cap table. Like we're not taking any equity. We're literally paying you to develop. And I always encourage founders to use it as a lily pad approach. So rather than take, VC to do your prototyping, your R&D, if you have that dual use case, leverage SBIR and STTR to do that, and then use your VC investment to fuel your growth, hiring, building out the team, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's incredible. So yeah, I think that's probably a question most founders have, what is the difference and maybe how could, non-dilutive capital opposed to like private, venture kind of like rounds that you raise, like what is the difference? How can they complement each other? And what does
Yeah,
that mean for your startup and ownership too? So yeah,
yeah,
thank you for that
absolutely.
breakdown.
Of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah, and I'd like to maybe step back. I mean, we've covered a lot of amazing resources available to founders today, and we've talked about your background, but maybe what advice would you give to an entrepreneur looking to break into the space and that's interested in maybe starting or working with, a space and defense startup, but they don't really know where to begin? What kind of for someone really brand new to the industry, what are the top skills they should develop? What is something they should know or look out for?
Ah, that's a great question. So probably the most fundamental is if you are doing defense related things, you need to be conscious of um, a lot of the legalities and things like that that go around being a defense company or a defense tech company, however you want to phrase that. Things like CFIUS, so where you're getting your capital, where the folks on your board are from, um, you know, who could be your potential customers. If it's a near peer adversary, we are in what is called the great power competition. Those can be DQing kind of metrics. So if you're taking capital from, you can probably guess what organizations, countries, etc. That's going to be a very long road, and it's something that you're eventually going to have to either buy them off of your cat table, um, or you're going to end up DQing yourself from a long term of like government work. And that's just, I wish there was a better way to do that, but that's just kind of how we have to protect kind of national interests and things like that. Now, when it comes to being a founder, I think the biggest thing like I don't know how to say this. Like this is hard. Like it's definitely not easy, and I think we definitely live in an age where folks are like always trying to sell you a course or like all these other things and like drop shipping and all that other, flavor of the week on Instagram or TikTok or whatever.
Mhm.
This is hard. You're solving a hard problem and you're solving probably especially if you're in space, some of the biggest problems for humanity. And I think a lot of people look at space and say, hey, that's where billionaires want to go to Mars, but that's not true. Like you touch space every single day. Like if you're coming to I2A Expo Day on October 17th, selfish plug, here at the bridge, you're probably going to use GPS to come here. Well, you have touched a military satellite to come here. Same thing, your banking, your fantasy football team data, all of that stuff has a connection to space. And so as a founder, realize you're solving these hard problems and it takes a long time. And also, as you start to raise venture or you start to connect with folks and start to build your team, these are slightly longer lead times than you're going to see from like a SaaS company, right? We're talking more like 7 to 10 years. And so, if you're just starting out, if you're passionate about space, if you have an engineering background or even like me have a business background, start to find a problem to solve. You realize you're solving for a very, very hard problem. And then with that, it's all about really value, like value stream mapping essentially. So how are you adding value? How are you changing the capability? The reference I always use is like what we have now is Blockbuster. How are you going to be the Netflix? And I realize there's probably a lot of people that listen to this that are like, "What's a Blockbuster?" So yeah,
Yeah. No, point made. I mean, you really drove it home there. I definitely I do remember those. So
yes,
for those that do, they'll understand for sure. But yeah, yeah, definitely. And I completely agree with you too. I think space and defense, it's a really intense industry to be in. It's fast paced, really moving. And like you said, you're solving hard problems. And you kind of, it's something to keep in mind. Like if you want to make sure like your passion and excitement and like really vision for the space is going to outweigh the time it takes because you're right, it is going to take time. You're solving hard problems. And yeah, just kind of getting you through like the challenging aspects of being a space and defense tech founder. It's hardware, like you said, right? Too. I mean, it's a little, it is more complex. The timelines are longer, but you're working on things that will like touch everybody, that
Yeah.
everyone will, can benefit from. And yeah, it's for the world. Yeah, definitely, definitely. And so thank you for that. And for those of
Yeah.
you listening, I hope you're taking notes because this is gold. And Drew, looking to the future, I think you mentioned, the space and defense industry is rapidly growing, right? I think you said trillion. What was the? Can you remind me again?
Yeah, so the space economy is expected to grow well over $1 trillion by 2030. So
Wow.
quick math. I know I went to an SEC school, so I'm not as smart as you guys. It's about 6 years off, right?
Mhm,
And so with that, there's also a lot of big push around workforce development.
mhm,
We do have an aging aerospace community, just outright. And so there is a huge opportunity for incoming talent. A lot of the work we do also looks at what does that talent pool look like and what does it mean to actually work in space. Everyone thinks, engineer. I'm not an engineer. All my degrees are in business. I'm hardline business guy. If I can't put it in an Excel sheet, like I'm gonna struggle. I did not do well in calculus. I'm sorry. Um, but there's different opportunities there from program management to operations to even working on like a factory line. There's all these different ways that you can plug into the space industry. And there's a huge opportunity, especially, if you're like, hey, either as a founder or you're looking for a job, there's a big plug there and a big opportunity to have a meaningful impact there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. I think, for all of the listeners, like there are definitely technical, students and younger people looking to start their careers. And there's also non-technical. So knowing that there's a place for you regardless of your background and there is opportunity for growth. There's a lot of, like going forward, you can find a place for you in the industry. So that's really encouraging to hear. So thank you so
Yeah,
much
100%.
for sharing that. And you know, another thing I wanted to touch on, just looking ahead, like, is there a specific area in this industry that you're excited about that you see coming and you're just like, man, like, I'm excited to be a part of this. It's an exciting time to be a part of the industry and what's ahead.
I'm super excited, really around kind of like OSAM, ISAM, so in orbit or on orbit servicing and manufacturing, depending on what you subscribe to, and then kind of like space logistics. And the reason for that is some of those underlying technologies like RPO, like rendezvous proximity operations, like catching things in space. That starts to unlock, no kidding, in the concept that we have literal jobs in space. So if we can get those technologies figured out, when we start talking like lunar permanence, and you start talking about the Elon and the Bezos going to Mars and all that, those technologies are the things that I get excited about. The analogy is that like the gold rush, like the folks that made a lot of money from the gold rush weren't people out there mining; it was the guys selling shovels and jeans. So I look at this as the shovel and jeans of kind of the space race, if you will. So I get super excited about that kind of stuff. Obviously, there's space is no longer a benign environment. Just say that. So there's some other applications kind of within that, especially on the defense side and maneuverability, that I'm super excited to see as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's a great, I love that comparison, the shovel and jeans, like that's great. And, yeah, it's an exciting time to be in the industry. And, I can't wait to see what's next. And yeah, so thank you. Thank you so much for your time. And, I want to give you the space to share, as we head into October, we have an exciting lineup of events, at LA Tech Week. Can you tell the audience a bit more about what you and your team at the DTI have in store?
Great. Yes. Thank you for the opportunity to do a selfish plug. Selfish plug. October 17th, 4 to 9, is going to be I2A Expo Day. I2A is our accelerator program. So as I mentioned, SBIR, STTR, we support companies that come through on a phase two. All of my companies are on a $1.9 million phase two, non-dilutive capital. I am 99% sure that this is the only accelerator program in the world where you get $2 million essentially from the federal government, 12 weeks of dedicated support. You give up no equity, you don't pay anything, and then we throw you a big expo day on the end. So October 17th is our expo day for the current cohort. So it's Alt P and T, so position, navigation, timing. So GPS, GPS denied environments, and then digital spaceport of the future. So what does it mean when we have both a commercial and military spaceport, and we are going to space more frequently? What is the digital infrastructure that happens there? Um, and so those companies will exhibiting their technologies. We'll have a couple panels, opportunities to connect to future challenge stakeholders. We will have a overview of the international landscape for investment in space by Seraphim Capital. We have a pretty cool fireside chat from some DAF leadership and a surprise VC that will be named a little bit closer to the event. And then Go Bruins, if you register, gets you, I believe, 15% off our registration, which covers, your parking, your food, and all that fun stuff. Be a good opportunity. Come hang out. Come chat with me. I'll be the MC. So if you like my dad jokes, whenever I'm on stage, there's going to be a lot of dad jokes. So
Yeah, well, Drew, thank you so much. I know I will definitely be attending, so I can't wait. I'm really looking forward to it. And for those of you listening, yes, please, if you're in the LA area, come attend, enjoy, and just learn about what's next in the industry. Kind of, yeah, yeah, and it's a great opportunity to network and yeah, get involved. So thank you so much, Drew. Thank you
yeah, of
for
course.
really sharing a window into your experience and your journey here in the space and defense industry. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, 100%. I'm on LinkedIn, so if you have any questions, people can just ping me. I'm very easily reachable. So
Awesome. Yeah, well, for those of you listening, you know where to find Drew. And thank you so much. And I wish you the best of luck going forward.
awesome. Thank you.